J. Marvin Herndon is a scientist, originally trained as a physicist. He earned a Ph.D. in nuclear chemistry and received training in geochemistry and cosmochemistry from world-class master scientists who had themselves learned from masters. His website is nuclearplanet.com, and it contains really easy-to-understand descriptions of his work. Here he is, the hour on Coast to Coast. Marvin, welcome back. How are you?
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
It's been a long time. Let me ask you, first of all, about this potential disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. Beyond the oil gusher, tell me about this story here that I read on this website, helium.com, that talks about the potential of millions being killed from this methane. Is this a serious story? Is this real?
Well, I can't say with any certainty whether there's such a deposit or not. I've heard one of your frequent guests, Richard Hoagland, talk about having some inside information about that. Well, I'm not privy to that. But what I do know from good, solid science, and this gets to what we talked about the last time I was on your program about abiotic petroleum and natural gas, I have, since that time, learned a great deal more, and I have good reason to believe that petroleum deposits, natural gas deposits, come about geologically in circumstances that permit methane gas to come from the mantle. And so whether there's a deposit in the Gulf, I can't say. But what I can say is that the possibility of such a deposit forming is something one should be very, very concerned about.
If the methane leaks through fissures, and Richard believes it's happening in the form of a bubble now, but if it continues to leak out, how serious is it for humankind?
Well, it's I try to imagine, and like I said, I don't know anything about the inside information. I imagine that if such a thing is happening, the government scientists in the know are probably sitting there scratching their heads saying, well, what can we do? If this thing goes, it's out of control.
It's out of control. They can't stop it then. You can't stop something that's happened on the planet.
It's a disaster. But my guess is they would also be praying that the methane freezes and remains as a solid lake.
Right. Can people suffocate if this mixes into the atmosphere, if it mixes with oxygen, for example?
Well, if you get enough dilution of atmosphere with anything, you can be starved of the gas. But if that were coming out and it mixed with oxygen, it could be ignited. It could
how bizarre.
Cause explosions. I mean, it could be disastrous things happening. Now, I'm not saying that will happen.
No, I know that, but it could.
But yeah, and the reality is, and I hope we have a few minutes to get into
absolutely.
There's good reason to think that, number one, that petroleum and natural gas deposits largely come about as a consequence of the Earth fracturing.
Well, listen to this, based on what you just said. According to worried geologists, the first signs that methane may burst its way through the bottom of the ocean would be fissures or cracks appearing on the ocean floor near the damaged wellhead. Evidence of these fissures opening up on the seabed have already been captured by the robotic submersibles working to repair and contain the ruptured well. So they're beginning to see this happening already.
Well, I haven't seen those results, but what I'm saying is we're not talking about just fissures at the surface that would allow this to escape, but fissures down deep below that's allowing the methane to escape from the top of the mantle, from the bottom of the crust. And therein is the reason that such a scenario could be very, very dangerous, because it's like opening a valve on a huge, virtually unlimited size gas tank.
It could kill the ocean and then eventually kill us.
Well, it could do a lot of terrible things. Now, there have been suggestions made, for example, that mass extinctions occurred 250 million years ago because methane was released. That's one idea. There are a lot of ideas. But
even if they plugged up this leak, they haven't been able to stop these fissures. I mean, it could still come out. The methane could come out, couldn't it?
The problem is, if there is such a big deposit, and if, well, you know, when you start a crack in something, you know, it's really hard to make a crack form like in a rock or a fracture piece of metal. But once the crack starts, then it propagates. It's much easier for a crack to spread, and to spread in other dimensions. And so that would be the real fear that I would have, is that once you start, you fracture the initial fracture, then you make a lot of other fractures.
Now, what would happen, Marvin, if they had a huge earthquake in that region right now with what's going on?
Oh, you are disaster-minded.
That's
tonight.
a devilish laugh, though.
well, the problem is that such things can happen.
Yeah.
And we're ill-equipped to deal with problems. And you know, the whole business that's happened in the Gulf is not a natural disaster. It's come about because of poor management, greed, irresponsibility, taking shortcuts, doing all the things that really are imprudent to do in the oil business. There was no sonar controlled shutoff valve. Now, if that well were being drilled off of Brazil or off of Norway, they would have had to. They would have been required by law to have such a shutoff valve.
Even if they had the valve and they were able to contain this a long time ago, would we still have this potential leak of methane?
If the well was totally sealed and everything, then maybe not. But here's where we're really getting into the unknown. You're really talking about drilling deeper than people have drilled in areas. Now, sure, they've drilled a really deep hole in Scandinavia in granite, but in the areas where oil deposits might be, this is really one of the deep exploratory wells. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns that go into that.
I wonder, Marvin, if the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is monitoring our air quality down in that region, and if they're prepared to issue alerts or evacuations if this is necessary.
I suspect that they would be praying as well, because I'm not so sure that anybody's really in charge and can handle this kind of a disaster.
Well, we saw what happened with New Orleans in Katrina. We're talking about several states to evacuate.
Oh, yeah.
That's impossible.
It's impossible.
All right, Marvin, let me bring in Richard Hoagland for a moment, our science advisor, head of the EnterpriseMission.com. He was the one, as you just said, who mentioned this gas bubble in the Gulf of Mexico. Richard, say hello to Marvin Herndon. Go ahead.
Hi, Marvin.
Hi, Richard. You certainly have better contacts than I have.
Well, fortunately, what I'd like everyone to know is we have a holiday weekend coming up, and the way we're going to be able to fill this vacuum of real data, real knowledge, is by pressuring our Congress people, men and women, who we elect. When they're home, they have constituency meetings, they have meetings with, local townspeople and all that.